Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Unfucking Your CX. As you know, I am your host, but let's just be honest, no one really cares. I'm just here to facilitate the conversation. You're more curious about who is in the hot seat. And quite frankly, I am so excited, Michelle, that you have literally come to the hot seat while you're in your car. So, welcome to Unfucking Your CX. It's good to have you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Michelle and I were just having a catch up, and we didn't realize how much we had in common when it came to playing college tennis and similar things. This is just the power of networking and LinkedIn, which is what I love. But Michelle, I'm really curious. So I like to set the scene. Typically, colleagues like us, if we are going to rant about a specific topic, it's typically happening maybe in our favorite coffee shop. Maybe it's having a glass of wine or a beer at a pub, or maybe it's just, hey, we're at the water cooler and something's driving us insane right now. So I'm really curious, like, where would that be?
Yeah, so I'm going to set the scene for you, which is I am currently sitting in my car outside of my daughter's gym. She's a competitive gymnast, and I spend many an hour here. So my rant is coming to you from outside of the gym today, which is it's actually one of my favorite places to be, quite honestly, because the stuff that this girl does is like unbelievable. It's just unreal what they do.
Yeah, I love it. And everyone's going to say good luck because she's got a big state meet tomorrow and we hope she does well. But I was sharing with Michelle, I completely understand it, right? Because I spend many hours in my truck working. I call myself the Uber dad in the evenings for sports.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, and one thing I wanted to mention about kind of our backgrounds that I think is interesting, and I have a feeling probably has played itself out within our careers as well, is we both started out with a biology background. And there's something about, I think, having science at its core and a desire for data to validate ideas and kind of the scientific methodology and approach in terms of how we go about CX that I think I can see in everything that I've watched about you that runs similar to how my approach is. And I think it's a really important thing to pull out and kind of thread to pull on because that approach, I think, for you for sure, and I know for me, has lent itself to a lot of success when it comes to actually being able to implement change within organizations.
That's so interesting. I didn't pick up on that pattern. So, for our listeners, I was sharing with Michelle that when I went to college, I actually wanted to be a marine biologist. So, back in the day, if you knew who Steve Irwin was, God rest his soul. I wanted to do the exact same thing, but in oceans with the marine life. And quite frankly, a lot of people know that I ended up playing tennis in Hawaii, and Michelle played college tennis as well. And then I just can keep up with labs and switch to business. But that's interesting, Michelle, that you kind of formatted that pattern. I think before we get to the topic that's really makes you cringe is a lot of times, and I'd love your thought on this and this input. A lot of times, CX can be viewed as very just emotional and not very data driven, right? It's more about kind of positive or negative feelings. And we always hear things like, emotional connection drives loyalty, which is so true, but you can also at the same time measure the impact in business on emotion. And I know you work with a lot of executive leaders. And so I'm really curious just your thoughts on kind of that emotion versus data and how you see that play out.
Yeah, I would parallel it to, and you probably came across this in your studies as well. It used to be nature versus nurture, and it was like one against the other. And there was a book that eventually came out, which is Nature via Nurture. And there was really an understanding of environment had a lot to do with what actually got expressed from a genetic perspective. And I would say I would parallel that with this idea of emotions and data. I don't think it's emotions versus data. I think it's emotions via data. And the way I think about that a little bit is, look, whether you're using Harvard Business Review or somebody else, there's anywhere between 85 to 90% of decision making is based upon emotion. And then we overlay data on top of the emotion. It is not the other way around as much as we may want it to be. So I think what you have to get really smart about is what are the emotions that you want people to feel and how do you engender those? And getting to that can be a very scientific process. That doesn't need to be kind of squishy and warm and fuzzy only, right? That can be very much a methodology behind it with a hypothesis, a thesis, and then, experimentation in order to get to an outcome.
Yeah, I love that. I just took a note on that too, which is, emotions via data. It just sparked this conversation I had with the CMO of a luxury brand about this time last year. And ultimately, their goal was when she left their boutique or their store, they wanted they wanted her to feel bold and empowered and confident, with the handbag or the outfit or the shoes, whatever she selected. And it made me kind of ask the question around, well, I'm really curious. If you think about your employees, how many of them feel bold and empowered and confident working for you? And she said, I'm not for sure why. And I said, look, we can't, as human beings, we cannot give what we don't have. So if your employees don't feel bold and empowered and confident, they cannot deliver that service or that experience, that empowers your customer to feel that way. So this is such a, I know this is such a, I love this, emotions versus via data, because a lot of times it's like some see it as either or versus you get to it through there. It's amazing. I'm really curious though, when we think about the topic. So what I love about Unfucking Your CX is there's always a specific topic that when you get asked about this topic, or you see it scrolling on LinkedIn and a lot of people are just talking about it, or it impacts the way that you work every single day, what is that one topic that just makes you cringe and why?
Yeah. So I'm going to leave the NPS alone because I feel like a lot of people have tackled that,
Yeah.
but it is probably number one on my list. But the second on my list is, I'm going to call it a little bit of a feeling of helplessness when it comes to CX professionals. And what I mean by that is this feeling of, I only have influence. I don't have direct control. I don't have a P&L that I own. I can't make all the changes that I'm seeing as being necessary based upon whatever inputs, data analysis that I have. And the reason why that drives me nuts is because, first of all, I think most organizations are pretty straightforward about when you step into these types of roles, you're typically an influencer. And the second is because it's actually not that hard to be a really effective influencer. And I'm going to jump ahead, if you don't mind,
Yeah, go for it.
parts of the playbook in terms of
Yeah.
how do you do that? I think the first part is when you're gathering all these data and insights, and I really want to focus a lot on, I'm a big believer in really three sources of data. One is your unstructured data. I feel like that, whether it's your chat sessions, your emails, your phone calls, your social media, what's out there, aggregation of all that information. That's what people say about you when you're not in the room, and you want to capture that information. Unstructured to me is the most valuable. When you layer on top of that operational data, now you've got real clarity in terms of the impact of what's happening based upon all of that feedback that you're getting. And kind of thirdly, and I put it thirdly because I'm not so sure anymore about the value of it, but survey data. So those are your kind of three sources of data. And when you look at those three sources of data and you've now identified, here are the three things that I really think this organization should focus on, right? Because they've either got really huge impact on the customer, they've got a really huge impact to the business, or overall it's just from a size and scale perspective, like you got to get this thing done. And they're all things that are completely upstream of customer service, as an example, like usually where the crap hits the fan. And you say, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get to all these people that are upstream of me, and I don't know how to convince them to not do this off the side of their desk, but to really put this into their core mission and objectives of things are going to get done this year. What you need to do are three things. First, you have to get to know all of those major players that are upstream of you that you know have an impact upon customer experience. And what do I mean by that? There's a friend of mine, she's so smart, Maureen Ahern, and she gave me this guidance of, it's called connect before you communicate. And so you really need to first get to know people on a personal level. It sounds cheesy. I will tell you, I'm the first person to go in and be like, all right, I got these 5 things I need to get done. I'm in. You actually have to first build that relationship and get to know somebody on a personal level. So do that, number one. Number two, as you're having that conversation, start to understand a little bit about what are their personal motivations? Like, what are they aiming to achieve? Maybe in 3 years, they want to be a CMO, or maybe in 2 years, they're really looking to retire. They want to spend more time with their high school aged kids. Whatever it may be, get to understand kind of their personal objectives in life. And then last, but certainly not least, really thoroughly understand what are their business goals and objectives? What are the KPIs that they have been driven to hit, and understand those. And now, take that data that you've gotten, all those insights that you have, and now you can craft a story around how do fixing these things influence the 3 things you just told me are the most important things to you. How is it going to help you to be a CMO in 3 years? How is it going to help you as an organization and a member within an organization achieve your goals and KPIs? And then, of course, how is it going to help us organizationally overall? And it makes them the hero. So now you become incredibly easy from an influence perspective to get the stuff done that you need to get done. And the last piece of advice I'll give is a lot of people want to go after the really big initiatives that they're like, oh gosh, we need a new CRM. Let's go implement a new CRM. If we fix a new CRM, we'll get all this other stuff done. I highly encourage people, as you start on this kind of path of influence, start small first. Make small wins, make them consistently. You will gain momentum. And once you've gained that momentum, now you've got credibility and buy-in. And the rest, next time you come and you say, hey, I want to do a CRM initiative that's really big and really complicated, people are really like, yeah, sure, Michelle. You've proven us every single time you've said this is something we should do. We've done it.
Mic drop. We could just end there. That was so amazing. And I love the topic that you're bringing up, because too many times what we continue to hear, and I drafted a newsletter on this early on, which was like, we believe a seat at the table should just be given to us as CX leaders or practitioners, versus that seat at the executive table or the board. It is earned. It's not just given. And what I love about I think the winning through influence is the hardest level of leadership that you could ever achieve. Because to your point, you don't have control over your cross-functional peers and the decisions that they make. You don't have control over their P&L that they're accountable for. And so I think it's so underestimated that as CX leaders, we just believe, well, because the CEO is talking about our customer and our customer is really important and we should be customer obsessed or customer centric, that everyone's just going to do it.
Yep. It's
And a
so
lot of
true.
times we don't know what it really means. Like, it sounds great, but they don't know what it really means.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, that's something that I think I suffer from a little bit too, which is because I've grown up in customer experience and all facets of it, right? Everything along that kind of continuum. I do this infinity loop because I think of customer experience as this infinity loop. I've done everything from awareness building to marketing to PR to sales to account management to product development to service delivery, like all of it on that continuum. And when we think about how we can influence that continuum, we've got this experience in the back of our mind, and it's like so crystal clear to us in terms of how, you know, finance's decision is going to impact the customer. But and we were like, it's obvious. Why didn't finance think of that? And the reality of it is, it's not obvious to them, and it's on you to help them understand what that connection is, and to help them kind of build that muscle over time, so that, because you can't be in every single decision, right? As a CX leader, and this is something I've also told a lot of CX leaders, like, you can't be in every single decision that gets made in the room. It's part of the reason why culture is so important when it comes to customer centricity in an organization. But you certainly can help people build that muscle over time by educating them on, hey, you know what, if you make that decision around that price increase there, here are a couple things that may fall out as a result, X, Y, Z, and here's why, even though you think it's going to be a $2 million initiative that's going to be positive, it's actually going to end up losing $500,000. And that helps them kind of rethink the whole problem in and of itself and come to a different method of getting to the same outcome of reaching the $2 million that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think part of what you are hinting at here and talking about is really about, you have to build internal CX champions that are going to champion for that specific customer friction that we continuously see in our data, they're going to prioritize it because, like you, I wasn't in every single prioritization meeting at Aaron's. I wasn't in every single conversation. And so what I had to learn over time is I need to build champions who's going to fight for that specific customer friction when I'm not there. And I love kind of the 3 points that you gave around it is first, it's all about building that relationship. So you have to really care about that person, not just from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective. And you want to make sure that you're helping them win. And I think that's such an incredible leadership lesson that you just pointed out there. And then ultimately, where they want to take their career, right? Because it's a stepping stone. And by
Mm-hmm.
helping them deliver continuous wins, that's going to allow them, whoever it is, whether she's the CMO or, whoever that internal champion is, that's how they get recognized. And that's how they start to be noticed of, oh, wow, she's delivering wins in her department. What if we just gave her another department or a bigger
Right.
role? Could she influence strategy on a greater scale versus just? And so, one of the things that I learned early on, Michelle, I'd love your thought on this, is when I was at Aaron's, like I started out in operations, so store manager all the way up to division. And at that point, Aaron's.com was just an online catalog. So you couldn't fully transact. And ultimately, like you could fill out a lead form and we'd route it to the store. And as the business was really starting to shift, it was a 60-year-old business. And so the store manager had total control on who we would do business with.
Mm.
And so ultimately I got invited to come to the home office in Atlanta, which is where really I to your point, I started to earn, through small wins, more and more responsibility. And a couple years had gone by, and my initial role was just to kind of be the liaison between the home office and the store operations as the website started to be transactional. And so I asked the CEO, why me? Like I had no, I mean, I could purchase from a website, but I had
Mm.
no clue how to build it or anything like that. And his feedback to me, Michelle, was, this isn't about e-commerce. This was about change. We are fundamentally changing a 60-year-old business on how our customers were going to interact with us. And the field needed someone that they could trust
Mm.
that would fight for them in the home office when they weren't there.
Yeah. I love it. That is so smart on the CEO's behalf. I don't think you come across it. I haven't for sure come across a ton of leaders that think that way, and I think it's so incredibly important. I also wanted to comment on one of the things you said before, which I think is really interesting too, as you watch CX leaders over time kind of hone this capability of influence. What ends up happening is the flow, like the direction of the flow changes within an organization. So it starts initially with, okay, CX aggregates all this inside information, goes to the various groups and says, hey, can you help me achieve X, Y, and Z, right? As you start to build that trust, the flow changes. And the CMO now comes to you and says, hey, I'm looking to do X, Y, and Z. Can you help me figure out how do I do that? What's the way to, and you become this really valuable, trusted advisor within the organization. I think that's exactly what you're talking about happened with you. And people look to you to be not just the voice of the customer, but the bridge between the customer and the business and helping the business react to what the customer needs.
Yeah, you're so spot on there. When I think about kind of that influence, and I always call it the pull versus the push, right? Ultimately, a lot of CX leaders, what I've seen now that I've moved out of industry and more onto the tech side, is we just want to push dashboards at them. I hate the word, but democratize insights to
Yeah.
them through dashboards in order, and we just assume they know what to do with the data.
Mm.
And so ultimately the goal is how do you drive that pull where you notice where it changes within the organization? And so that's always my feedback is start with very small quick wins that you can deliver into like a 2-week sprint essentially. And the outcome might be it's a $50,000 impact or a $100,000 impact to the business. And quite frankly, it's not the most meaningful, but what you did was you just changed maybe someone's KPI that they owned. So, for instance, if the digital leader has to increase cart conversion by a half a point, which is huge in retail, maybe you just help them get a tenth of a point by prioritizing these specific frictions. And so now they're like, oh wow, right? This was a big jump. And as you start to deliver those quick wins, to your point, now it starts to become the pull. What can
Hmm.
you do? What can you do? And I think the other thing that's so important as you develop that trust between your cross functional partners, I mean, let's just be honest. We're in this state of fear of messing up, FOMO,
Hmm.
right? Because if, as leaders, if we make a decision and we invest resources and time into something that doesn't equate to the business impact we thought, we're at fear of losing our jobs. And so, by you as a CX leader showing up and helping them really understand that voice of customer, but through business impact and really quantifying not just here's the impact of the current friction, but also the cost of inaction. If we don't take action, what does that continue to look like in 6 to 12 months? Which is the broader, it can get in the way of the CEO achieving that strategic vision that they laid out to investors or their board. And not many people really understand that. So, Michelle, I know you've done it successfully. Is there any other player tips that you have on framing it as a cost of inaction versus just, hey, if we solve this friction, we can expect X?
Yeah. Look, I think you're so spot on in that that is very often overlooked as one of the, I'm going to call it selling points of action and doing something. And at HomeServe, so HomeServe is a home warranty company. And when I was there, the space was starting to get saturated with some players that weren't really in the same space because HomeServe was really in the kind of utility space, but you were seeing like American Home Shield, which was really in the realtor space, but they were starting to encroach upon the business. And you were also starting to see some upstarts that were coming in. And really all they were doing is they were starting day one with a highly digitized kind of platform and capability and tech stack that enabled them to grow digitally over time. And everybody else that was in the marketplace, they'd been around for 20, 30 years, and they were kind of like clobbing along, I don't know what the right word is, with all this old infrastructure and all this old technology that disabled them from being able to have that kind of growth that you knew might come. And in that situation, to me, it was really important to be able to say, hey, this initiative isn't just going to help you acquire or retain more customers, but it's going to keep competitors at bay. And here's why, because competitors are going to come in and they're going to find this way to be able to do this, like a fully digital self-serve experience, which maybe not everybody wants, but a lot of people want some of. And you're going to lose your customers to that because here you have to call every single time you want to do a single thing. So we need to figure out how to solve for that to be able to keep those disruptors at bay. And I think that right now in particular, with the prevalence of AI, the speed at which people can start businesses, start services, you as the incumbent in a space very much have to pay attention to the opportunity for disruption. It may initially feel like a little ankle biter, but I think very quickly some of those disruptors, as they learn and as they have maybe more flexibility internally to kind of test and learn, test and fail, which the larger organizations have less of an appetite for because they're risk averse, that there's really, you have to keep your eye on the prize in terms of understanding where there's not just the opportunity for growth, but there's also the opportunity to keep the disruptors at bay.
So true. That is so true. And I think it kind of helps us wrap up when we think about kind of that helplessness that you started with, right? Which is that was the topic that you really wanted to unfuck, which is around I don't have influence, I don't have P&L ownership. And it's ultimately around stop being an insight manager and be a business partner.
Mm-hmm.
And you will see your influence just absolutely grow. And you become that confident of helping them even minimize their fear of messing up by presenting a very strong supporting case objectively with data and emotion through the data, that the executive team then can decide, okay, here's what we want to invest resources in. We're going to allocate, some devs to go sprint on this, whatever it may be, or an investment. Because I've seen it on the flip side where leaders have actually lost influence cross-functionally, not as a CX leader, or have lost their job because they were seeing data in the business They didn't really know how to quantify it.
Mm,
And it became that blind spot of the CEO. So they never really raised it up for that fear of messing up. And then it turned into an absolute disaster.
I've seen that too. Yeah, particularly I see it more on the B2B side. There's a fear of, hey, this client is not totally happy with the service they're receiving. I don't want to share that because I don't want anybody to think that it's because of my account management team, my account management skills. I'm going to keep it quiet. And then all of a sudden the CEO gets a phone call, the third largest client just defected to their competitor.
Ugh, that feels like another hot seat that you got to come back for. Michelle, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Good luck to your daughter. But for our listeners who want to learn more about you, maybe have a conversation with you, where can they find you? What are you up to? Give them a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there easily. I've done a bit of a pivot recently, all within kind of line, I'll call it, within customer experience, which is I'm now doing executive search. And the kind of route to getting there was really as I started to peel back the layers of the onion and think about how do you get to the core of really great customer experience. I started recognizing it's really about employee experience, and happy employees, as corny as it sounds, deliver really great customer experiences, not just front-facing, but everybody in the organization. And then I started getting to, well, how do you create that environment where you have happy employees that feel truly trusted, empowered, and psychologically safe to make mistakes and learn from them. And what I came to realize is that's really about culture. And really great leaders build the kind of cultures on their teams that allow for those three kind of systems pillars to exist. What I've seen in organizations is like pockets of high performing groups. But if you really want your business to thrive and hit that kind of like hockey stick of growth, it can't just be pockets. It's got to come from the very top of leadership. They have to be the ones that believe in this type of culture and create this culture in an organization, not just a poster on the wall. And so that's why I made this pivot to executive search, because I want to help organizations find those leaders that are going to create those kinds of cultures that ultimately result in those high growth models. So that's my latest shtick.
I think it's definitely needed because it's what I loved what you just said. It's got to be more than just a poster on the wall. And I think too often a lot of people will walk by and see the poster on the wall and know it's just that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very important. Well, Michelle, thank you again. You've been tremendous. And don't be shy. Always come back to being a guest.
Okay, Zach, this is great. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
inviting me. I had a blast.
Cheers.